Okay, so we're gonna do this. This is what it looks like when I am trying to do a reading for class. Okay? Okay. So, today's reading is called Neither the Simple Backward Look nor the Simple Progressive Thrust, Eco-Criticism and the Politics of Prosperity. So, first we have an abstract. Rather than focus on nature writing and the redemptive qualities of an unmediated encounter with nature, eco-criticism, it is argued here, should attend more of the role of consumerism and prevalent conceptions of human prosperity and the destruction of nature. Now, I read that sentence. I have no idea what it means. I had to Google what the word eco-criticism means, and just so we're on the same page, eco-criticism is the study of literature and the environment from an interdisciplinary point of view. So, in other words, there are these literature scholars that analyze texts and illustrate. So they analyze texts that illustrate environmental concerns, and then they examine the ways that the texts treat the subject of nature. So I kind of get that. I don't understand why the word is called eco-criticism, because like a criticism is like, oh, that makes sense. Okay, moving on. Okay, continuing from the abstract. Elaborating on this position, the chapter offers some criticism of both constructivist and naturalist approaches to conceptualizing nature. It emphasizes instead the critical differences between humans and other animals in creating and potentially in resolving ecological crisis, distancing itself in doing so both from the self-subverting rhetoric of recent post-humanist denials of human exceptionalism and from the political abstraction of a specifically human consumption encouraged by Spinozan Deleuzian ontological monism. Okay, so I was following for the first quarter of that sentence, and then it lost me. And there are too many words here that I don't know. So we're gonna skip that, and we're gonna keep going as well. Okay, so it concludes by offering some examples of what a more consumption-oriented eco-critical approach might consist in, drawing on Shakespeare's King Lear, some aspects of English Romanticism. That's the one thing I know that we're doing here so far. I love Romanticism. And readings of contemporary fiction by Michael something last name, and Ollie Smith. So, the key terms in this paper are constructivism, naturalism, posthumanism, consumption, avant-garde, nostalgia, human need, Shakespeare, King Lear, romanticism, and hedonist dialectic. Okay. Preliminaries. Nature, the human, the role of humanities. Eco-criticism has been viewed as an engagement with literary texts that themselves constitute nature writing. In other words, that explicitly seek to invoke the qualities of the natural world, animate or inanimate, and reflect upon those qualities. It has also been viewed as an engagement with texts for what they reveal about human relations with the natural environment and or with other animals. And it has been viewed as a reading of texts with a view to drawing out the enlightenment they shed, or the lessons we can draw from them about eco-politics and the directions it should take today. You know, I understand that these are all real words, but putting eco in front of everything is just kind of funny. So it's like eco-tourism, eco-criticism, eco-cosmopolitanism, eco-localism, eco-politics. It's just like, well, okay. Soon we're gonna have eco-humans and eco-computers and eco-homes. We already have eco-homes, and there's gonna be eco-water and eco, I don't know, everything. Okay, let's not get too caught up with that. Okay, these are differing orientations rather than mutually exclusive interpretations, and their concerns are to some extent overlapping. But I myself am certainly in agreement with Greg Garrett's 2004 call for a move away from poetics of authenticity with its focus on the redemptive qualities of a supposedly unmediated encounter with nature to a poetics of responsibility, much more centered on culture and human action. Okay, so what I understand so far is what eco-criticism means, and that the author thinks we should move away from politics of authenticity and towards, poetics of authenticity to poetics of responsibility. I don't know exactly what that means, but I know that's what the author wants. Okay. Therefore, I shall offer some reasons here for favoring the third interpretation of eco-criticism's task. What was the third interpretation? Okay, I don't know which one. Okay, whatever. For favoring the third interpretation of eco-criticism's tasks and provide some illustration of how I see it most fruitfully contributing to a greener cultural sensibility. I don't know what sensibility is. I don't know what a greener cultural sensibility is. But as a way of setting the context for that part of my engagement, I shall begin with some fairly general remarks about the current context of environmental philosophy. Okay, cool. I can do that. The discrimination around the concept of nature that has been promoted in recent decades by the growth in environmental concern is now reflected in a complex and ramifying set of discourses. But in a broad brush way, we can distinguish between two main tendencies. On the one hand, in the calls to revalue nature as a site of intrinsic value, to recognize our kinship and continuity with other living creatures, and to abandon anthropocentric conceptions of humanity's privileged place within the ecosystem. We have been witness to what can be termed a nature-endorsing tendency. Nature endorsers lament, I Google that one, that means to be sad about, kind of like lament the loss or erosion of nature. So people who are nature endorsers don't like there's loss of nature. They emphasize human dependency on the planetary ecosystem and demand that we acknowledge environmental limits and the confines they impose on human society. So that's three things. That makes sense. As a counter to this, on the other hand, that bothers me. It bothers me that this person wrote, as a counter to this, on the other hand. Don't need both of those things. You can have one, you can have the other, you don't need both. Although sharing some of its naturalistic arguments on the human-animal affinities, The constructivist tendency has emphasized the formation or mediation of human culture in whatever comes to count as nature or natural, strongly influenced by recent developments in the field of genetics and information technology and by post-structuralist theories. This approach is skeptical of any redemptionist appeal to nature, nature's power, while also often celebrating the breakdown of clear-cut distinctions between artifice and nature, organic and inorganic, as an emancipatory advance, as freeing us from the confines of supposedly natural sexualities and modes of being. Now, this sentence is 6 lines long. This sentence right here has, let's just take a quick gander, 64 words. Now, someone explain to me how a sentence is the same length as a paragraph can be. And I feel like there's too, supposedly this all works. But this is also very hard to follow. But whatever, we can't do anything about that. So we have to keep trying to understand what's happening. Okay, so, I don't know the word artifice, I don't know the word emancipatory, and I don't know what organic and inorganic has to do in this context, because I know what that has to do in terms of chemistry and other things. Not in this context. In this context I'm unsure. I also don't really know what redemptionist means, but okay, so Artifice means clever or cunning devices or expedients. I don't know what okay. Is this just me? I mean, I'm a third-year college student, but dude, is it just me who doesn't know all these words? Okay, so, so this approach that she's talking about is strongly influenced by different things. It's skeptical of something, and it celebrates the breakdown of the distinctions between artifice and nature. Okay, let's just focus on the freeing us from the confines of supposedly natural sexualities and modes of being. So if artifice is something that is used to trick or deceive others, so we're trying to separate okay, but does the person mean nature in terms of like the environment, or nature in terms of like human nature, or like nature as in like natural? Okay, we don't understand that, so we gotta keep going, because I can't figure out that sentence. Okay, both sides to this debate have important things to say and need to be heard. But both too, as I have argued in my writings on nature, often fail to distinguish adequately between differing invocations of the idea of nature, or to explore the coherence of their normative implications. I don't know what invocations means or normative implications. Okay, so they fail to distinguish between different ideas of nature. I think that's what that means. And then they fail to explore coherence, the clarity of their, and they fail to explore the clarity of what the writing implies, or what the idea of nature implies. The endorsers, for example, in one aspect of their argument, invite us to believe that humanity is part of nature and call upon us to get back to it or to re-cement our links with it. Yet this nature is also at the same time presented by them as that domain which is definitionally independent of us, but now ruined or largely lost through human intrusion upon it and contamination of it. Okay, so I think the author is trying to say that people who are nature endorsers are hypocrites because they tell us that humanity is part of nature, right? But when they say that we have to get back to nature, that implies that humanity is not part of nature. I think that's what this is saying. I'm not sure about what the second part has to do with it. Maybe it's not saying that nature endorsers are hypocrites. Maybe it's just saying that they're trying to make the point that humans and humanity is a part of nature, but that we became separated from it and it became independent because humans contaminated it. It's one of those things. And to add further to the confusion, that's a beautiful sentence. Thank you. You know exactly what's happening as I read this paper. To add further to the confusion, the natural environment is often identified in these arguments with parts of the landscape that are the outcome of centuries of human agricultural activity, and in that sense at least as culturally contaminated as most built-up environments. In its political implications too, the hands-off nature approach to conservation, encouraged by the endorsing perspective, has often proved too ready to give preference to wilderness preservation for the eco-tourists over the welfare of indigenous people, or too quick to make humanity in general responsible for the environmental destruction associated with the pursuit of Western-style affluence. Okay, so people are more likely to preserve land for the sake of tourism than they are to preserve land for indigenous people. Actually, that's definitely true because like a lot of development requires digging up minerals and other things that are often found on indigenous land, and or like digging a pipe through indigenous land. And so a lot of times the government or just people in general will vote on something that causes the destruction of land where indigenous people live. And then, yeah, I guess that makes sense. And then the part about the pursuit of Western style affluence is this whole materialism thing of how like Americans, and it's mostly Americans, that just, want a lot of things. But also, like, it's saying don't blame all of humanity when this big problem has just been the desire of like a culture that wants more things, of a culture built upon like your purpose in life being an object. Okay. At its most extreme, it can license the totalitarian control of human population advocated by some adherents of deep ecology. What is deep ecology? Deep ecology is an environmental philosophy that promotes the inherent worth of all living beings, regardless of their instrumental utility to human needs, and the restructuring of modern human societies in accordance with such ideas. The constructivist position, on the other hand, is at risk of denying or abstracting from environmental pressures altogether. Okay, so this position is at risk of denying or abstracting from, so denying environmental pressures. The treatment of nature as a continuously revisable signifier, what does that mean? Does little to address material damage to the environment, nor does the treatment of nature as a continuously revisable signifier does little to address material damage to the environment, nor does the unqualified stress on socialization give due recognition to the nature that grounds bioscience and environmental change and always constrains the form of their intervention. After all, even the most sophisticated experiments in genetic modification are dependent for success on pre-given biological laws and processes. The same point holds for the larger scale forms of human interaction with the environment, where there is always a distinction to be drawn between the powers and processes which are the essential precondition of all agricultural practice, on the one hand, and the humanly modified landscape and its plant and animal life on the other hand. Okay, there's a distinction between powers and processes and the landscape and the physical things that are on it. So like powers and processes, does that mean like forces, like gravity and you know, weak force, strong force? Okay. In this sense, there's always a nature that is not the construct of human culture and technology, but is the primary condition. In this sense, there is always a nature that is not the construct of human culture and technology, but is the primary condition and context of any cultural intervention and manipulation in the first place. So, whatever this whole position is about, it always causes some sort of division between something that is nature and something that is not nature. Yes, no, maybe. I wish someone could tell me if I was thinking about any of this correctly, because frankly I'm lost. And I'm on page 3. of 17. Let's just point that out really quick. In an attempt to correct for the respective shortcomings of both endorsing and constructivist arguments. Okay, so there's something wrong with endorsing argument, with the nature of endorsing arguments, and there's something wrong with the constructivist arguments. What exactly is wrong, I am not sure, but there's something wrong with both of them. And in order to correct for the shortcomings of both of them, the author says, I myself have defended a position on nature that I describe as both realist and humanist. It is realist in the sense that it recognizes the contrast between an independent nature, conceived as a permanent ground of all human bioactivity and environmental change, and the lay or surface concept of nature that use the term nature, with which we refer to the empirically observable and always historically changing and culturally conditioned life forms and environmental effects. So I am not certain, but I don't think the author wrote that I have defended a position on nature that I describe as both realist and humanist. And then the author says it is realist because of this, and it is humanist. Oh, that's the next sentence. So it is realist because of this, it is humanist because of this. But what is it? Have I missed it somewhere? I'm not certain exactly what the author's position on nature is. Oh wait, yes I do. It is away from poetics of authenticity and towards poetics of responsibility, and I have no idea what that means. Okay. It is humanist, on the other hand, in the sense that... How many of these on the other hands? Well, on the other hand, in the sense that although... Like, there has got to be a better way to write this. Okay, it is humanist, on the other hand, in the sense that although it recognizes human kinship with other species, it runs counter to the monist naturalism of those who would assimilate human patterns of need and consumption to those of... I'm already lost, okay? I don't know what monist means. M-O-N-I-S-T. Monist is from monism, which is a view that there's only one kind of ultimate substance. A view that reality is one unitary organic whole with no independent parts. Okay. I feel like this would actually be really cool if I understood what it was saying. It runs counter to the monist naturalism of those who would assimilate human patterns of needs and consumption to those of other animals, rather than highlighting critical differences and the role of those differences both in creating and potentially resolving ecological crisis. It is human ways of living, after all, that, much in contrast to the cyclical and reproductive mode of existence of other animals, are responsible for most environmental damage, and they alone who can do something about it. Okay, so humans are different from animals, and our patterns of living are different from animals because we are responsible for the most environmental damage, and we are the only ones who can change it. Now, that's interesting because we are responsible for the most environmental damage, but I would argue that we aren't the only ones who are capable of inflicting environmental damage. Like, for example, there are lots of species that are ecosystem engineers, and all those species that count as ecosystem engineers, they change the environment that they're in. So, for example, like beavers can build a dam, and sometimes that's great for some animals, and sometimes that's really bad because then some fish can't go up or down the river, you know? Just like human dams. You know, obviously not just like human dams. Humans are definitely much worse in terms of like scale. But, you know, we aren't the only ones. I mean, but I guess I get that there is definitely a big difference because of the scale. But it's not a difference completely in terms of action, if that makes sense. Anyway, I understood one sentence. Okay, in this connection, I have emphasized what I term human biological underdetermination relative to other creatures, and the range of choice of action that is therefore in principle available to us. That is therefore in principle available to us. Okay. The current ecological situation, I argue, okay, we're not going to comment on that. We're not going to. The current ecological situation, I argue, is better illuminated not by reference to the intrinsic qualities of non-animate nature, is better illuminated not by this, nor by recalling us to fundamental kinship with other living creatures, but by confronting the distinctively human appetite for innovative forms of cultural transcendence and individualizing self-expression. Viewed in this light, the key ecological problem is whether we can find ways of living rich, complex, non-repetitive lives without social injustice and without environmental collapse. That sentence makes sense. We're going to write that down. This is not about how to better respect or get back to nature in the sense of reverting to traditional or a simpler way of life, but how to advance to a form of future that is both assertively human and ecologically benign. What does benign mean? Benign.
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 Gentle and kindly. Okay. Ecologically kind. The focus, in short, should fall less on the adoption of the right attitudes or ways of valuing nature and more on the conditions of human fulfillment and how these can be secured in an ecologically sustainable mode. What are the conditions of human fulfillment? I take issue in short. Why are you saying in short salt? Did someone edit this paper? I take issue in short with those, and they are well represented among eco-critics who think environmental politics has more to do with appreciating nature than with revising ideas about progress, prosperity, and human flourishing. Okay, so the author has an issue with the people who think politics has to do with connection to nature instead of things like progress. Okay, I could see that. In the same spirit, I question the adequacy of a Spinozan or Deleuzian eco-critical approach why am I thinking of the circus? That refers us to a play of forces through which all living things are united in a rhizomic universe. Alright, let's Google that one. Rhizomic. A thick horizontal underground stem of plants, such as the mint and iris, whose buds develop new roots and shoots. Okay, so Rhizomic Universe. So like the one where everything's connected. Okay. This is not so much because it is ontologically mistaken. I have definitely heard of that before, but I don't really know what that means, so I'm going to Google it again. I definitely read that in a physics book once, though. Like ontological versus epistemological. Okay, ontological. Branch of philosophy that studies concepts such as existence, being, becoming, and reality. You know, having to Google so many words and not knowing so many words makes this really, really, really hard to understand. This is not so much because it is ontologically mistaken, but because it invites a positivism and fatalism of approach, recognition of the relationability of being is, after all, consistent with any and every ethics or politics. With any ethics or politics, such theory, moreover, tends to operate at such a level of abstraction that little guidance is given on the economic and political institutions that could meet its professed objectives, and in the absence of that guidance, it too readily reverts to an essentially descriptive amount of actuality, a comprehensive but somewhat scholastic mapping of practices and subjectivities attached to a messianic and hence ultimately evasive politics. Okay. So, I don't know what that means either. Okay. Okay, so there's little guidance. There's some theory that we're talking about in this sentence. That doesn't give any guidance to economic or political institutions, and this absence of guidance Oh, and because of the absence of guidance, it reverts to using a description of reality instead of reality? I have no idea what scholastic mapping of practices and subjectivities attached to a messianic and hence ultimately evasive politics means. I don't know what that means. Once again, 66 words. That is one sentence. Okay. It is fine to point out that we are all interconnected in nature and share much more with other animals than we previously thought. But what matters politically is recognition both of the role of humanity in bringing out ecological collapse and of the distinctive capacities humans alone have to monitor and, in principle, adjust their behavior and environmental impact. I get that sentence. Okay. I have understood about 3 sentences. We're getting there. So 40 minutes, 4 pages, 3 sentences. So if every page takes 10 minutes to read, and there's 15 pages, that means there's, 15 pages. That's gonna take like 2 something hours. Interesting. Let's keep going. Such arguments, of course, presuppose specifically human demands for self-realization and self-expression, and the capacities of reason, language use, imagination, and so forth needed to act on those demands. They are committed, in short, to human exceptionalism. Of a kind that has been challenged by some forms of post-humanist argument, from material to post-human eco-criticism. I say some because I accept a great deal of the Nietzschean, Marxian, Freudian, and more recently post-structuralist critique of the humanist subject conceived as an autonomous and epistemologically self-transparent agents of history. You know, if all of these words were themselves a different sentence, maybe I'd understand something. But, okay. Human persons, like other creatures, are subject to trans-individual, systematic processes and pressures, notably today market forces, which are now always spoken of as individual agents of human destiny. But there is also, of course, the more usually cited example of language and other semiotic, I don't know that word, systems that are presupposed to forms of consciousness and communication rather than purely expressive tools of them, and these structures, though humanly created, are in many ways beyond their keener control. I don't know that one either. I don't know that sentence. Post-humanists are right in that sense to point out the ways in which modes and the very means of communication are involved in what it means to be human at any given point. So there's lots of influences on what it means to be human. What they are, I don't know. I think that's what this is saying. I would also, on the issue of human-animal relations, endorse a good part of the argument of those who want to problematize the discourse of rights in its application to non-human animals, on the grounds that it rests on an inadequate conception of justice, one that fails to see that what generates our moral response to animals and their treatment is not some distanced and impartial calculation of what consideration is rightfully due to them, but rather our sense of mortality and vulnerability we share with them and the compassion that goes with that. Okay, now this sentence, I know I'm supposed to be figuring out the meaning of this, but this sentence is 97 words. Now seriously, that is a problem. That is definitely a problem. Oh my goodness, no wonder I don't get it. Okay. But it is precisely with a view to sustaining the philosophical coherence of this kind of position, with its appeal to the distinctive role of human imagination and sympathy in generating moral response, that we need to defend human exceptionalism. Alright, for some reason, we need to defend something that is called human exceptionalism, and exceptionalism is the belief that something is exceptional. Oh wow, the first thing that comes up is a picture called American Exceptionalism. What a surprise. Derek Mahan Riley asks in his poem, The Mute Phenomena, what we know of the revolutionary theories advanced by turnips or the sex life of cutlery, and suggests that already in a lost hubcap is conceived the ideal society which will replace our own. I don't know what a hubcap is, but if we more seriously question whether we should continue to privilege human intellectual and emotional capacities in our dealings with other forms of being, then we shall surely also subvert the range of normative distinctions without which there would seem little point in moving the critique in the first place. Okay. In the ecological thought, Timothy Morton argues that we should not set up consciousness as yet another defining trait of superiority over non-humans. Humans, he suggests, are fairly uniquely good at throwing and sweating, and that's about all. I think cooking should be added to that, personally, because I think cooking helped humans get really far. And that's a unique thing that we kind of do. It's like fire and stuff. But to belittle what is distinctive to us in this way is also to undermine the idea of the human person as enjoying any special claim to self-realization. If Morton is right, why is he writing books? Or why should we find the idea of the clone morally problematic, or think of cloning as disdaining to our human species being? And the issue becomes even more acute in relation to machines. Even those who would have us blur the mind-machine conceptual division have argued for it on the basis of the quasi-mind possession and ensouled qualities of advanced computerization. I understood the sentence, if Morton is right, why is he writing books? And I think it's saying, I think I see words on the screen. I see words so like this is what it looks like. And it looks kind of like a block. It doesn't have any concrete images, but the abstractness, I think, of this particular paragraph, I think, is talking about how human, like, it's arguing something about whether or not humans should see themselves as distinct from animals, and on what reasons we should or shouldn't, and whether or not we should add more reasons to that. What exactly the reasons are, or what exactly it's talking about, I don't know. But I think that's what we're getting at. Okay. But if these capacities or attributes are themselves regarded as problematic because they are rooted in some regrettably humanist endorsement of human powers of cognition and reflexivity, in some preferring of minds and souls, then why should the approximations of intelligence to human capacities be accorded any special attention in this context? I don't know what the context is. One might note, in this context, the petitio a principio of certain Deleuzian influenced arguments that theorize the self as wholly relational, while accounting for its individualization by invoking some kind of inner force or agency of organization that negotiates or singularizes the pattern of interactional processes for a useful discussion. Oh, no, for a useful discussion, that's in parentheses. See Gilbert 2014. For in what sense exactly does this provide a more insightful explanation than speaking in terms of minds and subjects? Granted that individuals are a complex product of brains, bodies, and environment, we still have to allow for that singular element which allows the individual to totalize or transcend the relations composing the individual. Okay. This relates to a more general paradox. Okay, what was the first paradox? There's a more general paradox, but what's the specific paradox? At the heart of the what in the world is ethico-political project of the post-humanist destruction of the Enlightenment framework of thinking about human development, for the more plural and flexible forms of personal fulfillment that it seeks to open up in regard to animal connectedness, gender, sexuality, disability, and so forth, have in truth much more in common with the Enlightenment project for self-realization than any prior framework of thinking about human freedom, subjectivity, and self-expression, and the political norms of empowerment, democracy, emancipation, creative potential, and the like that are so often invoked in such a theory, laudable though they may be, cannot, it seems, be grounded in relational ontology and thus remain arbitrary and voluntaristic. Okay, I don't know what voluntaristic means. I still don't really know what ontology means. Don't know what laudable means. And I don't know what theory we're talking about. So let's just keep moving on. Post-humanism then subverts itself if it attempts to go beyond human exceptionalism, and the most persuasive of the post-humanist discourses are those which are prepared to recognize and talk about the lurking humanism of the forms of questioning of the nature and limits of the human that are opened up through the post-humanist project. Did we discuss what the post-humanist project was, or did I miss that? For in the last analysis, the rhetorical address of the post-human only makes sense as an appeal to the imagination or the moral sensibility of those already within the human community, even if it invites reappraisal of the confines of self-imaging or of that community. I don't know what reappraisal means, and I don't know who is not in the human community. Like animals? Is that what we're talking about? As Stanley Cavell has suggested, what is so human is that we share that fact with other animals, that animals are also our others. What is so human is that we share the fact with other animals, that animals are also our others, that we are animals. Being stuck with this is something one might call seeing us as human. It is a feeling of wonder. Okay. That was the first section. The second section is called A Revised Politics of Prosperity, the Role of Avant-Garde Nostalgia. I need more tea. And a snack. Okay. It follows from my emphasis on the importance of rethinking human prosperity rather than the nature of nature, The global environmental problems have to be recast as problems of consumption, and in a twofold and interconnected way. Firstly, there is the problem of the huge disparity between rich and poor in their access to resources, and hence the minimum of material conditions essentially to any further flourishing. Redressing this imbalance, I would argue, is... Why is it redressing rather than addressing? This imbalance, I would argue, is both moral and pragmatic. Is both a moral and pragmatic imperative, a demand not only for social justice but a prerequisite of any long-term global ecological survival. The other problem is that of consumerism. I thought that's what we were talking about before. That the other problem is that of consumerism. The problem, namely, that human flourishing is currently so widely perceived, both by those with access to it hitherto mainly affluent people in the West, and by those without access, as dependent on an ever-enhanced consumption of material goods and luxury services. The two problems connect in the sense that pressures of a more egalitarian distribution of global resources are likely to be applied unless and until the good life is is reconceived along less consumerist lines. In the absence, that is to say, of a seductive and compelling alternative to existing patterns of affluent consumption and commodity-dependent forms of self-expression and self-realization, it will prove extremely difficult to provide a better deal either for the environment and its non-human life forms or the less privileged within the human community. What is needed then is a new political imaginary that would draw on the social complexity and reflexivity of a globalized era in order to break with the assumption that enlightened policies on race, gender, and human rights can only be carried on the back of conventional economic growth with its shopping mall culture. Okay, so what she's trying to say is that the new way of doing something, like of living, can't include the consumerism culture that we have now, which is basically what I thought at the beginning anyway, I think. Obviously we can't keep shopping mall cultures. Shopping malls are the worst, you know. I did a class on this before. Did I just say class? That sounds so weird. I had a class on this before about shopping malls, and shopping malls are the worst because they're designed not to have windows. They're designed like with all these rules that for like Americans won't walk more than like 300 or 500 meters, and so the biggest main stores of a mall, you're not allowed to be able to see one of them when you're standing at a different one, just because otherwise Americans won't walk all the way there, and Americans won't walk up or down more than one floor. So the most you can have a mall is 3 floors if you have people entering their car on the zero, like the 1 floor, and then have the 0 floor and a 2 floor, for example. And like there's no clocks inside and there's no windows, so you can't tell the time, and then it's really bright in the hallways, and then it's dimmer, and then there's like little rugs inside the actual store, so when you go in, sometimes you want to stay in there, or like there's calmer music inside the store, so you want to stay inside the store, or it smells good inside the store, which just like smells differently, or of course there's a huge food court, And of course they don't put the food court next to the stores with the bikinis, because otherwise people won't want to buy the bikinis. And it's almost like entire manipulation. And then like all these advertisements that tell you that if you buy this watch or this purse, that you're gonna have a purpose in life or something, or you're gonna be valuable, as if you don't have intrinsic value. So like, yeah, I totally hate the whole shopping mall thing, but I don't understand this whole article. It would also offer a profoundly different, secular, but less materialist conception of human flourishing, as dependent on the shortening of the work week, the expansion of free time, slower and less stressful modes of transport, and the more evolved and universally available educational and aesthetic pleasures, rather than on enhanced productivity, stressed out work routines, and ever-expanding material acquisition. I feel like basically that's just saying the world is way too stressed out. And yeah, it is. The culture is, particularly in America. That's why I hate being in New York. But I feel like this is way too complicatedly, this is written way too complicatedly. This is way too complicated. And I feel like whatever this person's trying to say could be said in a way that makes sense. I don't know what that is. Okay. So, I'm tired, and I have no idea what avant-garde nostalgia is, so I don't know if I really want to get to that part, even though that's the part we were on for the past page or something. So yeah, I give up for now. I got through less than half of it. I don't understand what it's saying. So I'm just gonna go with, I gave it a try. And I did. Maybe I'll try again before we have class on Monday, because today is Friday. But also this makes no sense, and I've gotten at most like 3 sentences out of it. And I really have no idea what it's trying to say, and I really don't understand the point of us reading this. Like rethinking the good life, like how, like okay, sure, rethinking the good life, but I don't understand what any of this means. Honestly, I could probably just say something off the top of my head from the things that I know about shopping malls and like humans being too stressed out, culture, and like materialism, and just probably it would be that, even though I wouldn't know it. Anyway, bye for now.